everyone. My name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all, and today I want to talk about dominance. Y'all have been asking for more videos about the left side of the slash, and I am happy to deliver. What are dominants? Why are dominants? When are dominants? These are just some of the questions I will be trying to answer in our discussion here today. Now, this is going to be a little bit different than my usual 101 style format, so I won't be going over all of the basics since I'd like to focus more on the philosophical side of what it means to be a dom. But if you need a more comprehensive beginner's guide to power exchange first, I will have some resources linked below you can check out. With that being said, though, where do I want to begin? And I think the best place to start is with how I define dominance. So to me, a dominant is somebody who has authority in their relationship in the context of a consensual BDSM dynamic. I like this a little better than some of the other definitions out there, which tend to focus too much on either sex or sadism, neither of which are required to be a dominant. And we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of the video. And I also don't think it's helpful to make arguments about how much control a dominant has to have before they're allowed to call themselves a dom. If you think the title fits you, whether you micromanage your partner's entire life down to the minute, or you only take control in the bedroom, congrats! I think you can call yourself a dominant. And do not even get me started on people who get really finicky about age or experience level either. It is a perennial joke on FetLife to make fun of the 20-something dude who calls himself a master the second he makes an account. Like, how can you call yourself a master of anything when you haven't even finished going to college yet? That's the normal type of refrain you'll hear. And in certain sub-community contexts, I do think it is worthwhile to be more careful with using the term master in particular, and often just calling yourself a dom too. While this is not the prevailing sentiment in the larger BDSM world nowadays, at one point in time, it was believed that you had to earn the right to call yourself a master, and you would earn that right through a period of training with somebody else, usually a more experienced member of the community, and you possibly also had to be that person's submissive or slave as well. And with how nascent kink was back then, I understand why this was so commonly the done thing. We didn't have widely published books about how to do BDSM yet. I mean, we definitely didn't have places like FetLife or the glut of podcasts and blogs and YouTube videos that people can now access in a second. And basically that meant the only way to get information was by learning from someone else directly, or you just winged it and figured out as you went along, which was not always the best way to go about things. Or maybe a lot later on, you possibly had the option of going on some of the super early internet groups that talked about kink and maybe learning from that. But, we didn't even have things like aftercare or safe words totally codified yet. If you weren't learning from a reputable source with a high degree of oversight on top of that, there was a real chance that you would end up hurting someone without knowing why. And directly transmitting information from trainer to trainee required a high level of investment, and that helped to weed out casual hobbyist people who maybe wouldn't have taken the lessons quite so seriously, and it also reduced the number of folks who just do what they sometimes do today. They show up to one or two events, they advertise themselves as a dom, and then they bounce the second they get a partner and leave the public scene. And, with all that in mind, I can respect why things were done the way that they were done back in the day, and in some places it is still done this way, but the kink community exists in a different context now, and not everyone wants to play in the public community or pursue really high-level, high-intensity relationships. We are a big umbrella now, and we need to get used to the fact that there is a plurality of approaches to this lifestyle, if indeed somebody even considers it to be a lifestyle at all. Some people will only want to call themselves a dom or a master after they've gone through a certain amount of training first, or with the approval of their local community. Other people just have, say, a pet play dynamic, and it makes sense for their pony to refer to them as master because it feels right. Or maybe they're into dollification and they're looking for a dolly even though they don't have a partner yet. And so master indicates the type of relationship framework they want to have. So it just sort of leaves a bad taste in my mouth when folks try to say someone isn't allowed to call themselves this or that yet merely because of their age or experience level. I mean, are there fake doms out there? Yes. Does just trying to play whack-a-mole by saying, this person isn't a real dom and I can tell because of how old they are, do anything to help that? As far as I can tell, not really. As long as someone is an adult, it's not really up to us to decide from the outside what terms they're allowed to use or not within reason, especially because perception is inherently subjective. The one who seems like the biggest domly dom, who has it all figured out, who has all these advanced skills, and who plays in the dungeon every week, and who brags about how much they worked on their contract, they might just be keeping up with appearances and not really practice any of that stuff. And the quiet younger dom who keeps to themselves may have more confidence in private with their partner. We have no way of knowing. And, oh, by the way, this should really go without saying, but just to be totally clear, anyone of any sexuality or gender identity can be a dominant. If you've heard anything about dominance being an inherently masculine trait or inherently feminine, that's all BS. You can take your energy into dominance and make it your own, however and whoever you are, okay? So just don't worry too much about that. If somebody tells that to you, they don't know what they're talking about. And I say all of this up front because I don't want anyone to be hamstrung from participating in this conversation because they're waffling about whether or not they're allowed to claim dominance for themselves in the first place. If you think you belong and you're of age, i.e. you're an adult, you most likely belong. And, at the same time, what's the harm in just seeing how things go if you're not sure? I'm a big proponent of just trying things on for size. I mean, that doesn't mean you should go and grab a flogger and start wailing on the next available bottom at the next party, of course. I just mean, mentally try it on for yourself. Think about yourself being in that role. Figure out what title might resonate with you. Practice some skills on your own. Reflect on your fantasies. And if it all feels totally unnatural and forced, there's your answer. No harm done. But if you are dominant, how do you know? What does being dominant feel like? What makes a dom tick? And that's what I want to now focus on. As we all know, BDSM representation in the media leaves a lot to be desired, let's say. We all know the disaster that was 50 Shades of Grey, of course, but even the other movies and shows out there have their flaws, even the pretty popular ones. Think about Bonding, which repeats the tired stereotype that female dominance stems from reactive anger against masculinity and wanting to cope with trauma. And even with Secretary, which is one of my favorites and many people's favorite in the whole world of BDSM movies, but it still has its flaws, right? Because it shows a dom that is destructively and impulsively acting out their desires with inappropriate partners, as the name would suggest. If you haven't seen it, his secretaries. And I could come up with a couple more examples, but you get the idea. Time and time again, we are told that dominants are self-destructive and egotistical and cold, distant, uninterested, unable to love, and broken from trauma. And they hurt others because they're projecting or displacing anger. And they need control because they just simply don't trust anyone else. They're, in a phrase, mentally unwell. This belief is so pervasive that it permeates through even academic research on BDSM, and it makes it functionally impossible to have any conversation about dominance and kink without having to spend 10 minutes on disclaimers about mental well-being and health outcomes for BDSM participants. And Lord knows what it does to people who are trying to just break into this community and find themselves TikTok is so confused about what it means to be a dom on average that they had to invent terms like vanilla dom and pleasure dom because it was assumed that the average dom simply could not like vanilla dating, or they couldn't enjoy vanilla sex, or they didn't care at all about their partner's pleasure to the point that it had to have a special label for it, when in reality, dominance has always been multifaceted, and most doms do think about what their partner likes and what their preferences are, and they take that into consideration. But, I don't blame 20-somethings online for coming up with new phrases. That's just a rite of passage you get to have on the internet. But it does signal to me how deep this chasm of misunderstanding still is, and I hope we can do a little bit to correct that here. And there's also what conservatives and radfems think about dominant people of all types, but especially men. And as far as I can tell, their opinion on doms is that they are people that are sick in the head who enjoy making women cry in order to get off because, prawn messed up their heads beyond repair. And I don't even have time to get into all of that, but suffice to say that is incredibly reductive, and it's not reflective of reality in any meaningful way. So, beyond the desire for pain and suffering so many people associate dominance with, what does make the average dom tick? What's behind the scenes there? And, I can make some generalizations, but it is going to be individual. And I would say what I mentioned before, right at the very top, that dominance is about having authority in a relationship. So it's about what having that authority does in a person's brain, how it makes someone feel, and what the motivation for that authority is. And contrary to the popular image of doms being cold and distant, the majority of doms I know enjoy being involved with their partner's lives. They like helping others find success and stability in life. They enjoy being someone else's advocate and cheerleader. They like seeing the people they care for grow and feel good, knowing that they had a role in that. I'm actually reminded of how Wonder Woman is described in the movie Professor Marston and the Wonder Women, a benevolent authority who treats people well and who shows people the benefits of willingly submitting to that authority. A good leader is not someone who only barks orders from the sidelines, but someone who can direct others from the front, often leading by example rather than just telling other people what to do. So a dominant satisfaction is not just from being the boss, but seeing the fruits of their efforts and knowing that the person or people under their care are thriving. And even when they are cruel or cold or blunt, it has intention, it has purpose, it's not just out of nowhere. That may be the style of leadership their partner needs. It may be a situation that calls for that level of detachment. It's not just done willy-nilly because the dominant just wants to look tough and save face. And, then there's also a whole other component, which is the service side of things. A dominant may get joy from their partner's successes, but they also often like the idea of being provided with service and having their lives be easier as well. Having someone to tend to their needs so they can focus on directing rather than just being bogged down in the minutia. Being comfortable with this, though, is oftentimes a long process for many doms, who are frequently taught to be fiercely independent and to not bother anyone else. But when they're able to break through that stigma and ask for what they want, there's a lot of pride in receiving good service, because that just does not come out of nowhere. It takes a lot of communication and training to get to that point. And if there is one emotion I would associate with dominance, it's positive pride. I don't mean in a deadly sins kind of way, but just what it sounds like. A feeling of deep pleasure and satisfaction from one's achievements that are earned. It's a feeling that's secure and stable and joyful. Another major component is also trust, too. I spoke recently in a video, which I'll link down below, about how the heart of submission is in those split-second moments where you have to decide to trust and lean in. When you're confronted with a hard choice, that requires you to do something uncomfortable or new, and then you choose to do it. Not because you anticipate you'll actually like it, or because you're trying to avoid punishment, or because you're going to get some kind of reward for it, but because you trust in your partner's vision and your mutual commitment to your goals. In that moment, you are choosing to say, I don't really know where this path is taking me or us, but you said this is the way, so I'm just going to go for it. And that doesn't mean shutting up and saying nothing if there's like a bear on that path or it's overgrown with thorny bushes. Of course, speak up if there's a major issue. Don't follow blindly entirely, but when the path is clear and seems safe enough, you go. And that's the moment where submission exists. The corollary to the dominant side of the spectrum is in that moment of deciding to give the order, seeing all of the multitude of possibilities, including inaction, and choosing the option that puts you on the course closest to your goals, even when it's hard to make a decision. The wisdom, the trust, the decisiveness, that is where the heart of dominance lies. Being able to make those calculations and lead with both conviction and awareness, in my opinion at least. And this is not to say that making those calculations is in any way easy, because it definitely is not. If you aren't used to being in the driver's seat, it can be nerve-wracking, but it should eventually get easier with time. And there's a difference between being nervous that you'll be able to make the right choice and being terrified of the idea of having to make any choice at all. A good leader will, in my opinion, always be at least a little bit worried about the outcome. Not so much that they freeze up and don't make any choice, but enough that it factors into their decisions. This is not the same thing as getting total option paralysis and being so unsure of what to do at all that you just don't do anything. And when that happens, a would-be dom often then goes on to just go into like full nose to the grindstone mode, and they just blindly charge ahead after delaying for way too long because they think that bravado can take the place of thoughtfulness, but it can't. And you'll notice that as I've been talking, I've never mentioned being like domineering or alpha or being bossy. I haven't talked about taking up space or being bold or brash or anything else like that, right? Because those things are, at best, optional window dressing. They're the outer packaging that people sometimes mistake for dominance, but they are not the same thing. You know, fake it till you make it has a place, but in dominance, you can only fake it so much before somebody gets hurt, either physically or emotionally. You can't brute force your way into dominance if the underlying conviction, self-esteem, and sense of safety is not there. And heck, it might work for a while, even years, but that foundation will eventually crumble. And that's where dominance so often goes wrong. Forgetting important events, not keeping promises, not holding up your end of agreements or contracts. Those are all symptoms, but the actual problem underneath all of that is a lot wider typically. You may not have understood yourself well enough or been sure enough of yourself to make promises you could actually keep. You may lack the discipline to do things you don't enjoy doing long term. You may have been acting out the role your partner wanted you to play rather than the role that actually suited you. And worst of all, you may have been using dominance as a way to cover up your own insecurities rather than as a positive additive force in your life. So many dominants don't have healthy relationships, not because they can't find good partners, but because they aren't good to themselves first. They focus on their partners, micromanaging every moment, giving them infinite to-do lists, because when everyone else around them is busy doing what they're told, they can't look anywhere else. They can't look at you, your flaws, your insecurities. And you also can't look at yourself either. You just don't have time, right? You don't have the bandwidth. You have to make sure you're paying attention to your submissive because you're just going to help them, right? That's your job. And so you don't look. And that can be a comfortable way to live right up until it's not. And I say this not because people who do this cannot be dominant. It is very common. But because if you are doing this, you need to check in and be aware of it. You can change this and still be dominant if you want to. But if you don't, it's like trying to build a house doomed to structural rot. And just like, why do that to yourself, if you have a choice not to, is my thought. But I don't want to make the ending part of this video like all doom and gloom. I hope that these descriptions have helped you understand what dominants get out of dominance beyond the sexual thrills or the desire for pain, because those can factor in for some, maybe even many, but they are far from universal. If you pictured yourself in some of these scenarios and it gave you a sense of satisfaction, desire, or comfort, well, I would say that is a feeling worth exploring a little bit further. Now, how to actually get started with being a dominant is a whole other subject. And for that purpose, I will again link some beginner resources down below, some books that I enjoy reading that I think are really good to start with, other episodes of things that I've made on this channel that I think would be good reference points. I will just do as much as I can down below, of course. I don't want people to get bogged down in the book learning part of it. And hey, this is my job, right? I kind of need people to get a little bit bogged down in learning things before they get started on stuff, because that's like what keeps the channel going, obviously, is people watching the content. But there gets to be a point where there's diminishing returns, right? You can spend 6 months, a year, 3 years learning about kink, just fantasizing about dominance without ever really doing it. But at some point, are you delaying so much that you're missing out on opportunities that could have been really good for you? Are you really getting anything extra when you're not actually practicing doing the things that you think you want to be doing? So learn, read, listen to podcasts, but get into your local community. Go to events. There are meetup groups for people that are dominant with other dominants to get advice and just to vent and just to share space together, because dominants don't oftentimes get that with other D-types. So that's a good resource. Watch people at dungeons, talk to people in your community that have more experience. Again, take those classes. But eventually you do have to get off the diving board and start practicing it. And when you do make that choice, that is when you will really know if dominance is for you. And I'm not trying to say that dominance is totally universal and people are all motivated by the same things. I have a video I just did very recently on different dominant archetypes, which I will link down below as well. So it is, again, very multifaceted. There are many different approaches, but I think that this helps maybe put things down on a perspective of okay, what is a dom getting out of this that's not just essentially a pathological, sadistic fantasy. It's the joy that a lot of people get from helping others, from doing a good job, from putting a lot of effort into something and seeing the fruits of that effort pay off. And it can actually be fairly wholesome. And I think some people also are just intuitively drawn to being in positions of authority because that's how they are. They want to be the one to dictate things. They like leading from the front. They like being the person who is planning what is happening, sometimes from discomfort that they can't trust other people, but also just because that is who they are as a person. And that's a very ephemeral thing to try and pin down, because I know in myself, I am not that person, right? I am the kind of person where I want to contribute, I have ideas, I want to formulate stuff, but ultimately I feel best when somebody else is telling me what they want to have done, and then I can execute on that at a very high level, but I don't want to be the one making the choices. And some people just know, I want to be in the driver's seat, I like being in control that way, and some people like being a passenger princess. What can you say? It is what it is. So hopefully this helped a little bit. I would love to hear from you all in comments down below if you're a dom. What is that inner clockwork for you? What is it that makes your dominance what it is? What motivates you towards it? How does it feel for you? Because from what I understand from my partners, a lot of it is the satisfaction and the pride and the accomplishment of it all, and the warm, glowy feeling you get when you help somebody. But definitely expand on it down below in comments. And if you have any other questions, anything else you want to know, you can leave in a comment down below as well. If you want to see more from me, if you're not already, please do subscribe, because I make videos twice a week about all different kink and BDSM related subjects. And if you really want to support what I do, you can go over to my Patreon. That'll also be linked down below. If you already support over there, it means the absolute world to me. And until I see you all next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.